In this video, we're going to be replacing the throttle position sensor on the 2005 Honda Element. Our negative terminal here, 10mm nut. Go ahead and back that off now. And set that aside. So our intake tube here goes from our air box down to our throttle body. And everything in the middle here is connected. So we're going to start disconnecting things from our intake tube. We're just going to pull them right out. All right, so just keep working these out. This here runs all the way down and around, so we're going to remove this hose just by pulling it straight off and set that aside. This harness here, if you follow it around, will be connected to an electrical connector in the back. We'll just remove that now. Set that aside. If you follow this down, this is actually in one of these little rubber wire holds here. Just remove that. Working up here, we have this connection. We're going to remove this hose clamp. We'll just use a pair of pliers here and try and spin it a little. Just peel it right off. These cables here, if you follow them up, are in these little clamps. We'll just pull these up and out. And just move these aside. They are going to kind of rest where they want to rest, but they are disconnected, which is nice. So now what we're going to do is remove our hose clamps on the bottom of our intake tube where it meets our throttle body. So down here we have our hose clamp. And we're going to remove this. This one's going to be an 8mm. So we'll back out and loosen up that hose clamp. You can also see right next to it, we have our throttle position sensor harness. If we remove our throttle body, our throttle position sensor will be attached to it. So we're going to unplug that now while we're here. I'm going to set that plug aside. Now we're going to move up our intake tube to our air box. Remove the front cover of our air box, and that'll allow us to take the front cover and our intake tube out of the vehicle. We have what should be an 8mm or a Phillips. I like to use the 8mm so we don't strip it out. Also, if you go look at the top one, it looks like there is no Phillips in there, and it may just be a rounded out 8mm. So we're going to do our best to remove these guys here. We are also missing one on the other side. Yep. And there's one down the bottom. We're still held in by the top one, so we'll need a pair of locking pliers to back that one out. With what should be 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts removed, you should now be able to lift your intake tube and front of your air box up and off. While doing that, we're going to twist a little bit and remove it from our throttle body. You can now take this out of the vehicle. So now our goal here is to remove our throttle body. So we're still going to need to remove some things around it before we get there. We're going to start with these lines here. There's 2. All right, so there should be hose clamps on here. It looks like they've rotted off. The one on the bottom isn't even tight, but it is there, and I think part of it's rotted away. Yep. So I need to replace those while we get into the reinstallation. Now we're going to take our needle nose and see if we can spin these hoses to break them loose. If your system's full of coolant or your system's hot, you're going to want to take caution. We have a drip pad down now underneath here, a little absorbent pad. You should expect to see some coolant come out of here. Just be prepared for that. Okay, grip and rip, let it flow. All right, so we have another hose on top here. We'll just squeeze that clamp. Move out of the way and see if we can get our hose to come off. There we go. So what we're going to do here to get these loose and free of this bracket is actually take the bracket off. Somebody's been here before us and they've taken this harness out of this clip and they didn't put this bracket bolt back in. So in this case, it's going to be a little bit easier to remove this bracket. So we're going to go ahead and do that. It'll be a 10 millimeter. So now we have 2 bolts removed and our bracket is now free. So what this will allow us to do is get to the underside. If we follow our throttle body to the bottom side, you'll see we have one more plug and a harness connected to this bracket here. To remove our throttle body from the vehicle, we have 2 12 millimeter nuts and 2 12 millimeter bolts. We'll go ahead and remove those now. Now at this point, you can remove your studs or nuts, bolts or nuts. We can now remove our throttle body. Now if you remember, we still have things attached to it, so we're going to have to address those. The first thing we're going to do is get it into a working area here where we can unplug our electrical connection on the bottom here. All right, so we're just going to use a pick tool and get in here underneath this clip. Let's see if we can't remove this plug. There we go. Now with that removed, we have a little bit more freedom here. So now we have our throttle body out of the vehicle as much as we can. You should be able to take yours completely out of the vehicle. Ours has been modified, so we're not going to take it any further. But what we're trying to do here is give you visual access to your throttle position sensor. Your new throttle position sensor comes with a gasket. It's going to go in to the same place in the same orientation. You'll notice you have elongated ears here, elongated holes for your bolts or studs to go through, which means there's going to be a little bit of adjustment. Now what you want to do is take note of the original orientation and you want to make some marks so that your new piece goes on at the same angle. So what we're going to do is take a straight edge, just come straight down the center. So we're going to use our pick and we're going to make a line on our throttle body. If you need to, you can make a secondary line, but just keeping center line here should be pretty good. So now on this throttle body we have these rounded nuts on the studs. So what we're going to use is some extractor sockets. We're going to have to tap these on with a hammer. If you don't have any extractor sockets with a thin wall and you have one that'll fit, but the plastic here gets in your way, because you're replacing this, you can go ahead and cut these plastic sides off, which should give you a little bit of room to get your extractor socket on. Before you take this all the way off of this stud, we're going to try and rock this extractor bit off of the actual nut here, like that. Now we should be able to just press this back on, remove it the rest of the way, and it should come out of the socket a little easier. Flip this on its side. Again, we have to be very careful, and we can try and pry out our throttle position sensor even left and right. There we go. All right, so there's the old. We have a little corrosion, a little residue inside there we're going to have to clean up. All right, so now we can discard our old throttle position sensor and we can install our new throttle position sensor. Before we do that, I'm going to want to blow out in here with some compressed air. Make sure you get rid of all your corrosion. Before we move forward, we're actually going to come in here with a wire brush. Just clean up the surface where the gasket's going to mate up to. And again, we'll follow this up with some compressed air. Okay, so now we're going to line up the center here on this throttle body arm. All right, and you can tell we're a little bit out of position. So now what we need to do is rotate and line up. For us, we made a center line from this electrical connector clip here through the center right here to our mark on the throttle body. For you, just go ahead and line up whatever mark it was you made on the original. Once you're lined up, we can go ahead and screw this down. All right, so your throttle position sensor is going to be held in by our new screws. And it's going to come with some washers and some lock washers. You're just going to go from outside to inside. It's going to go screw, lock washer, washer, throttle position sensor. All right, so now, not too concerned about this being exactly oriented correctly. We just want to thread these screws in to start. All right, so this is still loose, but holding our throttle position sensor. Do the same thing. We have screw, lock washer, washer into the throttle body through our throttle position sensor. Okay, now what we're going to do is make sure our center line is lined up. Once it is, we'll go ahead and lock this down. Okay, so our center line is lined up. Go ahead and hold it down with thumb. Tighten these down. We're going to snug one side up, snug the other side up. Go back to the other side, tighten that up. And just keep jumping back and forth. We're going to take the rag out of the intake. We're going to take our throttle body. We're going to try and keep our cables lined up the best we can. We're going to lower our throttle body down onto the two studs that we have. Alright, so once we're down on our two studs, we're going to put our two nuts on our studs just to hold our throttle body in place. Alright, now we still have two more bolts. Alright, now we'll go ahead, take our 12 mil, and we'll snug all those up. We're going to do this just to snug them up. We're going to go in a crisscross pattern. So we're bringing in the throttle body nice and flat. Alright, now that we've got them snugged up, we can work on reconnecting a couple of hoses and a bracket here for our throttle cable. So now we're going to take our throttle cable bracket here and mount that bracket back up. Now if you remember, our car was actually missing this bolt. So at the very end, if we can come up with a bolt to replace that with, we will. So the next thing we're going to plug in is our electrical connection down the bottom here, which is going to be this plug. And the tab, the release tab on the plug is going to go on the bottom, like that. From here, we're going to take this harness, I'm going to clip it back into the throttle body bracket. Alright, so we have our upper coolant line here and our lower coolant line. We also have another upper coolant line here. We're just going to reattach those. Our hose clamps disintegrated as we took them off, so we replaced them. The sizes of the sockets we use will be slightly different than yours. So for these, they're going to be 1/4 inch. And we're just going to tighten these down. Now this hose clamp here, this style in particular, you want to be careful not to put it too far like this, so you won't be able to get your air intake tube on. So you're going to have to figure out a good position for that, which for us is going to be flip this around. And put it on the outside. Now that we have our 3 lines tightened up, we can move on. We're going to plug in our throttle position sensor. All right, and this is going to go up to our intake tube. So now we have our intake tube and the front part of our air intake box. Again, we have stripped out 8mm here, and one missing here, and one that's completely frozen down here. So when we replace this, it's just going to be these 2. You would obviously do all 4. On the bottom of our intake tube, we have a little notch here that we're going to have to align on our throttle body. So what we're going to do is just lower this down to our throttle body, kind of get it into position. And now we're just going to push it down onto our throttle body and align that notch, or that tab. Alright, so now that we're lined up down the bottom here, we're just going to tighten up that hose clamp. Working our way up, we have this harness. It's going to go into this bottom clip here. It's going to go into this clip right here. Right about where that white tape is marked. And it's going to go under and plug in. So we have our 2 cables going to our throttle body. They're just going to pop right in here. Just going to line the bottom one up, push that into place. Line the top one up, push that into place. We then have this hose here, and get our hose clamp ready. We're just going to push this right onto the intake and then put our hose clamp on. From here, moving up on this side, we have this hose that we put aside here. There's a hard plastic piece on this hose. It's going to go right here. It's going to push in, and then our hose up top is going to push right on. So our air intake, or our air box here, we're going to make sure that we are inside of our air filter, and it will push close and seat nicely. At that point, we can start putting in our bolts here. They're going to be Phillips or 8mm. We're going to go with the 8mm. And on the top, because it is stripped out, we're going to use a pair of locking pliers. Now that that's snugged up, on top here, these are just going to get clipped right in. Just press them in. So once you have your cable here, right up in top, it's the last place for that cable to sit. Then you can plug these guys in. Everything's back to normal. We're up here at our radiator cap. What we're going to do is remove our radiator cap, and we're going to fill our radiator. All right, so we can put our cap aside, drop our funnel in. So you're going to want to fill this up to the top, then you're going to want to run your vehicle. You're going to want to cap it first. You're going to want to run your vehicle to operating temperature and let it cool down and recheck your radiator coolant level. At that point, if you need any more coolant, go ahead and add it to the top. You may want to repeat the process once or twice just to make sure you're totally full, and you're good. And the same thing on this side, just push it straight down and tighten our negative terminal down as well. Try and give that a twist. Make sure nothing moves.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.